So my one pick for round one was Josh Simmons. He was my favorite guy in the draft. I just thought his tape was a no-brainer. Just he checked every box.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a Wisdom Wednesday, and the wisdom is not coming from Taylor Swift. It is coming from Brandon Thorn, maybe the world's foremost expert on O-line play in the NFL in terms of the work that he puts in. Speaking of that, there is some news to get to from an O-line standpoint and other injury news, including Jordan Love, the Packers quarterback, that we'll get to right after we talk with my guy, Brandon Thorn. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
I think we've talked about this before, but I think most of you know that I am very judicious with who I follow on Twitter or X or whatever, because I take it seriously. I read every tweet of the people I'm following, because if I'm following them, I find their insight and content valuable. So out of the 73 people that I follow, this gentleman is one of them and has been for a while. He's been on the show before. I think he's as good as anyone and probably better than everyone else when it comes to evaluating offensive line play in the NFL. And I say that because he puts the time in. He puts the time in to look at these O-lines week in, week out, and the individual offensive and defensive linemen. He's the great Brandon Thorn. You can follow him, like I just mentioned, I do, at Brandon Thorn NFL. He does stuff for Bleacher Report and Establish the Run, and he has his own Substack, Trench Warfare, which is awesome. I highly recommend it. Brandon, great to talk with you, man. Thanks for coming on the show again.
Yeah, Ross, anytime you ask me to come on, I'm excited. So I love talking with you, and thanks for having me back.
So I'm bummed out that I wasn't able to go to O-line Masterminds this year. We actually did a family vacation to Africa with my wife's extended family and did the safari thing and all that. So
cool.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to come back to O-line Masterminds this year after I loved it last year. Man, it looked like you guys had some heavy hitters there this year. I always like to ask you, I already asked Greg Cosell, but just kind of what your biggest takeaways were this year. Was there anything you learned this year? Because that's kind of what it's all about. It's like continuing education for everybody involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like big picture, I think one of the things that always sticks with me the most is the Legends panel, when the top guys get up there and they just do a Q&A. And this year was cool because rather than Duke asking the questions, which is always good, Duke passed the mic to Teron Armstead. So he was the host of it, which was cool. But, you know, Kevin Mawa was up there, Joe Thomas and Will Shields and, you know, Olin Kreutz, guys like that. Kevin Mawa, that was the first time that he was there, and then Joe Thomas. So we had a couple new guys, a couple returning guys. So it was just, anytime the Legends get up there, I always am struck, you know, by, you know, just being a fan of the game, being a fan of them, of course. But I think what stuck out to me this year with them in particular was just their emphasis on taking notes. I said this before on another podcast, I think, but Kevin Mawa was one of the ones who really hammered this home, and he did it before he even said anything. When others were up there talking before the Legends panel, he was taking notes of current players, guys. We, you know, as we do during offensive line masterminds, we just don't have Hall of Famers, All Pros, Pro Bowlers go up there. We also have guys who are just trying to stay on a roster and give that perspective because we want to give all of it there. And even those type of guys, I saw personally Kevin Wall taking notes. And then when he got up there and talked about it, it was just, you know, he acted what he was saying. And it struck me that a retired Hall of Famer is taking notes of current, you know, solid, good level offensive linemen and all the way up to Hall of Famers as well. So that was just a good check and a good reminder for me, you know, to realize that I can always get something out of whoever's talking. So, listen to people, and you never know when you're going to get new knowledge, new insight, new wisdom. So that was really cool for me personally. But yeah, aside from that, just always every year it's you could succeed on the offensive line doing it a different way. I think that's one of the big takeaways over the last few years that's emphasized every year, including this one. Just, there's certain body types, certain types of players that you can learn from. And there's no real cookie cutter way of doing it. There's a lot of different ways to succeed on the offensive line in the NFL. So that was another thing that was emphasized by a lot of guys, which was a good reminder, I think.
Makes sense, right? If you got different body types, you're going to be more effective doing things differently. I don't know if we've ever talked about this, Brandon. I knew I had short arms. I didn't realize until I actually had my arm length checked at Penn State a couple times when I was up there that I have sub 31-inch arms, even though I'm 6'4.5".
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
that is like rare
Yeah.
short arms. So I had to jump people. I couldn't wait on them. I had to jump them and get to them before they even had a chance to get to me. Makes
sense.
It's funny. I didn't even realize. I mean, I think there's been like one guy at the combine the last 5 years with sub 32 inches. And it was Linderbaum, who's like a 6'1.5" center, and his was even, I think, 31.75. So my running joke, Brandon, I think I told this to AQ Shipley recently, is I no longer say I was a 7-year, journeyman O-lineman. Now I say I'm one of the 10 best sub 31-inch arm offensive linemen that ever lived. Because there's not
That's
many
awesome.
of us.
Right.
And especially good luck finding somebody over 6'4". Well, I don't even know how that's possible. I'm like a T-Rex. But at any rate, you have recently ranked every team's offensive line 1 to 32. It's fantastic. And then you ranked the top 15 players at every spot individually. So the team rankings are at Establish the Run. The individual rankings are at Trench Warfare, Brandon's Substack. I guess I want to start with this. And maybe the answer is the same, but talk to me about your team rankings methodology, because my guess is that you're doing this entirely based on film review as opposed to the zillion statistical measures that are out there, which a lot of measures that people now use, a lot of metrics that people use to evaluate offensive linemen kind of make me cringe, because they're not really offensive line metrics, but people want to turn them into that.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially obviously for pass protection and how quarterbacks often are the reason for sacks. So I think that's a big one. You kind of throw the sack statistic away for offensive line, and you have to watch the film to kind of determine whose fault it was on any given sack. So that's one. But yeah, I don't really look at metrics per se for offensive line. It is really rooted in film study and just an accumulation of it over the last 10 years now about studying film. And for Bleacher Report, the last 5 NFL drafts, I've watched it and wrote reports on every offensive lineman that's gotten drafted and a bunch of undrafted guys. So I have a good handle on the guys that are year 5 or below, and then the guys who have been playing longer. Just kind of trying to average out what you're expecting in this upcoming year based on their age, based on their most recent season, with a heavy emphasis on that. I also think it's very important to look at the scheme and what guys are being asked to do. I think you have to study the offensive line coach to some degree and kind of look at his track record of development, how guys have played under them. So I think that's a part of it. And then also, so that's coaching, but then scheme, offensive coordinator, play caller, whatever. I think that's a huge part of what you're going to get out of an offensive lineman individually and collectively based on what they're asked to do or not asked to do. Because some guys, they're okay somewhere, they go somewhere else and they're much better, or vice versa. I mean, this happens all the time, almost every single year. So I think you have to factor that in. And then also quarterback play to an extent as well, because you look at Will Levis, for instance, pass protecting for him versus what we're probably going to see from Cam Ward this season. We don't know what Cam Ward's going to look like, but I would bet pretty good money that it's going to be better than that in terms of pocket presence, which was Will Levis was really bad in the pocket last year. Granted, the right side of the offensive line wasn't good either, but still, quarterback play is a big part of pass protection production for offensive linemen, I would say. So, yeah, I'd look at all those things, but the heavy emphasis is on the individual player's film, and then all the other stuff are just pieces to the puzzle that you try to put together as best you can.
Do you have any, Brandon? Because I think everybody, as they watch film, they have some biases, even if they don't want to, right? So for me, I am always going to give a more favorable evaluation to guys that really play hard, that are really trying to physically punish the opponent. In other words, there are right guards that I think you could rank higher than Trey Smith, but I'm not sure there's a right guard I'd rather have than Trey Smith, right? So in my mind, like an enforcer like that, I think that permeates throughout the entire offense, the whole team. I think it impacts the defense. Trey Smith's my favorite player in the NFL. I adore the way he plays. And so, like, if I were doing rankings, Trey Smith would be higher for me than he might be for some others that don't value that aspect of the game as much. And I guess I'm just curious if you are aware of, or do you think you have any inherent biases when you're doing the evaluating?
I mean, yeah, I think we all have some sort of biases. And for me, I would probably align myself with that one to a degree. I heavily favor competitive toughness, is what I call it, just that finishing mentality. And not just the mentality, but you also have to have the physical traits to back that up. And Trey Smith is kind of, the prototype physically. And then he's also the prototype in terms of his attitude. So I think that should be emphasized, and there should be at least a healthy bias towards that when you're talking about the offensive line, because as you know, when you have a guy like that, it really does set the tone for the room, for the offense in some respects, and that's invaluable, especially later in games, later in seasons, when the grind really sets in and you have a guy like Trey Smith that you have to line up across from. I mean, there's hidden value in that, that you can't really quantify. So I would say that's a bias of mine. I don't know that that's like too much of a negative one. It can get me in trouble, especially when I'm scouting guys in college, I think more so than anything, because I really do value that, maybe more than I should at some times. But I think it also helps me as well because I really like Trey Smith coming out, Landon Dickerson, Quinn Miners, but then there's also guys like Tevin Jenkins who had all that, but didn't live up to quite the hype. Part of that's injury as well, but also maybe I overlooked some of his concerns in pass protection ability, like range, athletic ability, the inability to protect the corner is kind of why he had to play guard. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes it can get you into trouble. But I think it is a nice thing to bet on. But I mean, Trey Smith for me was my number 2 right guard in the league. I had him tier 1 with Chris Lindstrom and Quinn Miners. So I'm right there with you on Trey Smith and just your overall point there. But yeah, that would be one I think that I do have a bias towards.
Since you've done so much work on the rookies, I want to ask you about them.
Yeah.
Were there some rookies that you were particularly excited about? Because it seems like one guy that has apparently gotten off to a really fast start is Josh Simmons with the Chiefs. I called multiple of his games, and he was actually at San Diego State. And I couldn't believe he was at San Diego State because I was like, how did San Diego State get this guy? And then he was at Ohio State last year. But just from the rookies, were there guys that you really like that think will play very well right away?
Yeah, I mean, every year I do my guys article for Trench Warfare where I pick 10 guys throughout the draft. I only pick one first rounder, and then I try to focus on day 2, day 3 undrafted just to make it a little bit more difficult. So my one pick for round 1 was Josh Simmons. He was my favorite guy in the draft. The only reason he wasn't my top rated tackle is because I was a little concerned about the knee injury. Now that that's a non-factor, I mean, I just thought his tape was a no-brainer. Just he checked every box. And then when I sat down and spoke with him for an hour for my film room that I did with him, that also kind of convinced me too, in a lot of the way he handled that. So he was one of my favorites. I would say another one of my favorites was Tyler Booker from Alabama. I just thought, hey, so Tyler Booker, I did a film room with him. He told me his idol, Trey Smith. Um, and he said basically because of the way he plays, and they're similar in terms of their size. Booker's 6'5", 330, long arms, huge wingspan, massive guy, takes up space. He can anchor, like he has power. There's some questions about athletic ability. He's not quite the athlete Trey is, but that's another one, man. Like even though I gave him like a high second, late first round pick, I just felt very strongly about him having a high floor because I think that size, the strength, and the toughness that he brings, you're going to be able to lean on that if all else fails, and he'll probably be able to play for a while. So that was one. As far as like maybe some later round guys, one guy I would throw out there, Tate Ratledge from Georgia, who's on the Lions now, probably going to play guard for them. I know he's moonlighting at center a little bit, seeing what they have there, but another one, man, 6'6", 315 or so. He tested like an elite athlete, which is kind of a cherry on top. That's not really why I liked him. It was just he's big and his hands are incredibly strong. Once he gets his hands on you, reps are over, and he did that in the SEC for the last 2 seasons. He had an ankle injury last year that kind of made things a little murky in his projection, but a guy that just checks the boxes as well in terms of the stuff we like. So those are 2 that I liked a lot. Some like maybe another later round guy. I saw him a little later and then he got drafted. That was Dylan Fairchild, the other guard at Georgia, but I thought he went to the perfect spot. I thought there were shades of Wyatt Teller there. And the offensive line coach in Cincinnati where he went is Scott Peters, who was Bill Callahan's protege in Cleveland when they traded for Wyatt Teller. So I thought that connection made perfect sense. And I think he's in probably a pretty good spot to develop, although he's a little bit more raw. So he'd be another one that I would throw out there. So those are a few, guys kind of in a broad range of the draft that I liked quite a bit for similar reasons.
In terms of the veterans and the individual rankings, you said this in your rankings, and I'll echo it. I think somehow, in some weird way, Lane Johnson is still underrated or underappreciated. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it's because he's been playing right tackle and people still think left tackles are the better players. But I mean, you've been studying him for a long time, and it's remarkable how consistent he is, especially as a pass protector.
Yeah, and he's really aging like fine wine. I mean, it's last year was his best season, and it was his age 34 season. He's gonna be 35 this year, but last year I thought was his best year. Pass protection, run blocking. I think pass pro is where you have to start with Lane because he is, especially now that Zach Martin's retired. I think Lane Johnson's the best overall offensive lineman in the NFL this year, without question, in my opinion, because the pass pro I tend to value a little bit more than the run game. Now, obviously, I love the run game, very important. But if you could pick, can I have the best pass protector in the league or the best run blocker? I'd probably pick the best pass blocker, especially at tackle. It's just harder to find. And I think Lane is the best pass protector in the NFL at any position. He just rarely loses clean. I mean, I cannot think of the last time that Lane Johnson lost clean in pass protection. When he loses, quote unquote, when he gets pressure, notch for pressures according to PFF and stuff. When you watch those, it's him dying slowly, barely losing. Sometimes the quarterback, holds onto the ball too long and he gets a little close to the rusher. Like Lane just doesn't lose clean. Other guys lose clean. So Lane, to me, I kind of equate it almost to at this point, and I don't say this lightly, I think he is almost like the equivalent of Joe Thomas when he was playing left for Cleveland. That's kind of what Lane reminds me of. Just it's a machine-like consistency when he's in pass protection. And then he's also a very good run blocker who could do it all. So there's real no weakness there. I think an important piece of context there is Philly did operate a very offensive line friendly scheme last year. They ran the ball more than anybody, passed it less than anybody. So that's, worth mentioning. But when they do pass it, the tackles are on islands, and Lane is the best in the business there. So, yeah, I mean, can't say enough good things about Lane Johnson. But as far as why he's underrated, I just think not as flashy because it's pass protection, right? It's not burying people like Penei Sewell. And then Penei Sewell's used in motion. They hand him the ball. He throws the ball. He catches the ball. It's the Lions. It's a sexy story. Not that the Eagles don't get pub, but so I think that's part of it. It's just, when you're a great pass protector and that's the leading point of your game, it's easier to overlook for like fans and stuff like that.
That's a really, really good point. It's interesting too. I think a lot of people know that the Eagles have an elite offensive line. The other teams you had up there, the Bills number 2, the Bucks at 3, Broncos at 4. I'm not sure, the casual fan knows that those teams all have elite offensive lines in your rankings. And then the flip side, and I just to peel back the curtain a little bit, I call Brandon sometimes before I'm doing games just to get some insight from him. And I do a lot of AFC South. And you've got the Texans 32, the Jags 31, and then Bengals 30, Seahawks 29, Dolphins 28. By the way, not good for the Bengals, right? Like, you're trying to be a Super Bowl contending team to be that low. I will say Texans were the most disappointing to me last year because they weren't even injured. Like, that was the guys they thought were going to play, and none of those guys played as well as they should have, as far as I could tell.
Yeah, that was a collective failure just all the way around, not just from offensive line, but from also a coaching schematic perspective. Like, guys were not on the same page, and it's hard to pin that down as, when free runners, faulting who for that, the center, the coach, probably some mix of both. That's hence why the offensive coordinator got fired, the offensive line coach got fired. I think that's kind of where you start, and then they unload their two best players, and Shaq Mason and Larry Tunsil, which I also think there was kind of a culture shift that they wanted to bring to the offensive line room as well. So I think the vibes, generally will be better there. It's kind of like a fresh slate, new blood in there, new scheme. You would assume a certain level of competency is probably going to be there. So I wouldn't expect at least as many free runners, mental errors, missed assignments that we saw last year. But from a strictly personnel perspective, I still think it's a very underwhelming group and a very unproven group in many respects. So they have about 8 or 9 guys right now competing for the 5 spots. So we'll see. But there's just a lot of uncertainty there. Aging veterans mixed with unproven young players. So while I see a pathway for them climbing out of that bottom spot, I see a very low ceiling there just based on the personnel this season.
I could talk to this guy for hours. We could go through every team, every player. We don't have that kind of time. So what you need to do is you need to read his stuff on his Substack, Trench Warfare. You can get the link too if you go to @BrandonThornNFL on Twitter X. Brandon, always love talking with you. Thank you so much for the time, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime.
All right, let's dive into the news. But first, it is almost time for the weekend. That means you need to stock up on Labatt Blue Light with Buy Beer, Get Gear. All you have to do is go to the website, take a photo of your receipt, upload it, and you rack up points. I know a lot of you are diehard Labatt Blue Light guys. The Troutman brothers, who I was hanging out with recently, they love themselves some Labatt Blue Light. They better be racking up the points and racking up the merch. Rewards.labattusa.com. Just go to the website and check out all the sweet stuff they have. Rewards.labattusa.com. For you movie buffs out there, a couple years ago, Bob Odenkirk showed up out of nowhere as an action star in Nobody. That movie was a ton of fun, and now he's back in the sequel, Nobody 2, hitting theaters on August 15th. Bob returns as Hutch. This time he tries to go on vacation with his family, only for all hell to break loose. it is fun to see a guy like Odenkirk kick some serious you-know-what. Nobody 2 is produced by 87 North, the same team behind hits like John Wick, Bullet Train, and The Fall Guy. The film also stars Connie Nielsen, RZA, and the legendary Christopher Lloyd and Sharon Stone. Nobody 2 is a perfect summer movie. You don't want to miss this one. Nobody 2 is only in theaters August 15th.
Tux Takes.
All right, Ross, are you wearing the orange on purpose, first off, before we get to Landon Dickerson here?
I am not. I wear free Princeton gear every day. Thank you.
Update on Landon Dickerson. It is a meniscus tear, and he will undergo a minor surgery, and he's week to week.
Yeah, I saw where Dr. Chow, who has been pretty reliable over the years, said that even if it's a meniscus trim, it's usually 6 weeks. So we'll see when Landon Dickerson can get back. But considering how it looked, I feel like this is probably best case scenario.
Several injuries include the Ravens. They lose both rookie corners they drafted this season. The Dolphins, they lose running back Alexander Madison. The Saints, they lose Will Clapp, an offensive lineman, to season-ending injury. Meanwhile, both Packers quarterback Jordan Love and Jets backup QB Tyrod Taylor are undergoing surgery.
Well, Jordan Love, he's got a torn ligament on his left thumb. So, I think he'll be okay for the opener, but that's a lot of reps he's going to miss. It's not good. Tyrod Taylor, he's such an experienced guy, and really as a backup quarterback, you have to learn to do it without a lot of reps. Still less than ideal. He's having his knee scoped. As for the other injuries, never like hearing that about Alexander Madison and his issue with his neck. And the Ravens, that hurts their depth because they drafted those 2 guys for a reason. The only thing I would say, Jack, from a contract standpoint, Cam Hayward, I guess, is officially a hold-in for the Steelers, I think for the 2nd year in a row, but James Cook is back practicing for the Bills. So we lost one and we gained one in the contract hold-in universe that we all live in these days. It's Greg Cosell Day tomorrow. Everybody get fired up. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. I know for a fact that a lot of you have your anniversary coming up, and I know for a fact this would be the best anniversary gift you would ever get your significant other, so you should strongly consider it. And then forward me the email, and I will send you a signed autograph to whoever you want me to send it to. I don't care. Ross@rosstucker.com. What about some of the other big time, I think we're done here, sponsors, like Delicious Pizza Boy Brewing, or Sporticulture, HumanHeadNYC.com, or BackOfficeScheduler.com?